Well, I don't know if the idea of MK resonates so much as Jacob Zuma does, but him and MK seem to be synonymous. And it's him that's obviously driving party support for MK. So, it's kind of a one-man show, but it's a very big man. And he has massive appeal and impact, particularly in KZN, but you'd right off the rest of the country at a risk. I mean, there's a small pocket of support in almost every province for him as well. A lack of faith in the state and key institutions, a huge unhappiness and alienation amongst voters, and an anger towards governing parties. So those are the kind of environments the world over which will trigger revolution, but it doesn't happen in South Africa.
The State of the Nation team is very excited to announce a partnership with Pace Car Rental. Pace Car Rental is one of the fastest growing car rental businesses in South Africa, with branches all over the country. They've got branches in Sandton, Kempton Park, Pretoria, Umhlanga, Gqeberha. Wherever you are, Pace Car Rental is there as well. A bold podcast like the State of the Nation needs a bold partner. And we have found that partner in Pace Car Rental. So why don't you support them? Joining us on the State of the Nation today is political analyst and former political insider, Gareth van Onselen. Gareth, welcome to the State of the Nation. Very excited to have you here.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be here, man.
Now, Gareth, you straddle two worlds. You did many years ago have some experience within political life, but you're also a researcher, a market researcher.
Yes.
And you have done some polling, and I follow you on social media, and I would suggest that to anybody that has an interest in politics follows you. Where you gave forecasts, some analysis that you've done, some research that you've done, as to what 2024 election is looking like. Now, we understand it's very dynamic. Yeah. All sorts of things can change. But what were the main findings from your research?
So, Mike, just to explain, because it's a bit complicated.
Yes.
We're a market research company, so we provide market research for clients. So I can obviously talk about stuff that clients that we use have made public. I mean, one of the biggest ones is the Social Research Foundation and Francis Crinier, who you've had on here before. Those are essentially political polls. I mean, we do a whole lot of other stuff, but the political ones try to understand the landscape. There are a whole lot of indicators in there which are used to determine where party support is at, what leader favorability is like, and so on and so forth. And those are done on a fairly regular basis, and then the SRF releases them publicly. So we've actually done quite a few of these for the SRF over the course of the last year and a half. I would say about 4 or 5 polls. And the important thing to remember about polls is that they aren't predictions. They're just snapshots in time. So what you're saying is we went to the electorate and asked them where they stood at a certain period of time, and we can tell you within a margin of error roughly where parties stand.
Before we get into the sort of findings on that, you say it's a snapshot of time. You've done a number of these. Is there big movement within those timeframes? I mean, do people change their minds? Does your polls give different data?
Right. So there's not big movement. And the general trends are, the ANC sort of hovers between 40 and 45, tending towards 40. The DA is at around 20 to 25, tending towards 25. The EFF is around 10 to 12. Sometimes it goes up. The EFF is one of the hardest votes to peg down because it's very volatile. And its support fluctuates wildly depending on the national disposition to the ANC. If there's load shedding, it goes up. If there's, not, it goes down. But generally, it hovers around that kind of 10 to 12% range. And then there are a range of smaller parties that more or less stay around the same percentage. The big change, the recent big change is MK. I mean, that has fundamentally shifted the market. And it's, got the potential, whether it can capitalize on it or not, for sort of 10 to 15% nationally. The bulk of that support will probably come from the ANC, some from the EFF. it'll probably neutralize the the IFP's ability to grow in somewhere like KZN. I don't think it'll hurt the IFP, but it's going to neutralize its ability to grow substantially or at the same rate it has been in the past. So that's the real fundamental difference in voter outlook in recent months. But other than that, those kind of general trends have held for quite a while now.
So when you say MK somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, when they, I presume they have featured in your more recent polls because they've only just come to light recently.
The most recent one that we've done for the SRF was one in KZN, where MK was, it was the second biggest party in KZN. I think it came out around 25% or so. And if it's 25% in KZN, then it's definitely 5 to 6% nationally. But if it's 25% in KZN, you can be sure it's also got 5% in places like Gauteng and maybe a few other spots. And that's enough to take it up to sort of 10% nationally. Yeah. Whether it can hold that support or capitalize on it and grow it remains to be seen. It's a very new party. It makes an initial impact. And the trick in an election campaign is to hold your support until the final day. But it certainly has that potential.
Yeah, well, interestingly, the spokesman of MK, Klamula, has twice stood us up for an interview here.
Right.
So I know that they certainly are doing, Klamula and Ndlela, who is their spokesman, clearly their organization, is seemingly quite chaotic.
Well, I think they're working out what they stand for. Then they'll come see you.
Yeah, because we're dying to ask them, what their policies are and, of course, who their leader is, which, of course, nobody seems to know. But the idea of MK seems to resonate.
Yes, it's got a big, well, I don't know if the idea of MK resonates so much as Jacob Zuma does, but him and MK seem to be synonymous. And it's him that's obviously driving party support for MK. So, it's kind of a one-man show, but it's a very big man. And he has massive appeal and impact, particularly in KZN, but you'd write off the rest of the country at a risk. I mean, there's a small pocket of support in almost every province for him as well.
Yeah, but let's concentrate on the sort of, let's call them the big three.
Yes.
Now, let's first deal with the ANC. The predictions seem to be heading to that sort of 40% number. I know that at one point you went to some length to explain how difficult it would be to dislodge them as the party that actually gets an absolute majority. At one point, you were explaining how difficult that is.
Yes. So, before MK came along, I would have put the ANC, well, not me, the polls put the ANC between 45 and 50 and tending towards 50. So there was every chance, I think, before MK came along that it was more likely to get to 50 than not. And not by a substantial amount, and maybe it would have just missed it, but its prospects of getting to 50 were much better.
Which, of course, then leaves them open to taking on one of the entrepreneurial parties, somebody like Patricia de Lille that'll sell anything for a seat in Parliament.
Yes, exactly. Since then, I think they're between kind of 45 and 40 and tending towards 40. And their prospects to getting to 50 are much lower. But before MK came along, I think people underestimate just how many votes the ANC has and how badly it needs to do to drop below 50. It's really a substantial drop. You're asking for more than 7 points, which is huge in a national election. So it's perfectly possible, and it now seems more possible than it did before. But, that piece was designed to demonstrate that this thing shouldn't be taken for read. This is a very substantial party with huge support, and to drop it below 50 requires something pretty special. But now I think it's a bit easier.
Yeah. And, but of course there's still a question mark as to whether MK are actually going to line up at the start of the race.
Yeah, I actually can't work out what's going on that front. There's signatures that they have to comply with, which I think today is the deadline. I don't know where they stand on that front, and there's some internal dispute as to whether signatures are needed or not. There's the whole argument about the logo, although I don't understand what the legal implications are, because maybe they have to change their party's name, worst case scenario, but I can't imagine they can be deregistered because of that. Maybe you just have to change your name with the IEC. Yeah, and then other issues around them, violence and so on and so forth, but I don't think those are going to result in it being deregistered.
Yeah, it does look to me like they want to threaten their way onto the ballot paper rather than comply.
Yes, I think, the big sort of unseen fight behind the scenes is I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on the IEC from the ANC and other interested parties to keep them off for whatever reason, an illegitimate name or signatures not being correct or whatever the case may be. And there's huge anxiety and fear inside MK that those state apparatus will be used against them, probably because they know how to use state apparatus against your enemies. And so they're pretty panicked about it. So they're, these threats of violence and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the INC probably today will determine whether they're going to stand or not. If they get all their signatures, then you can have an argument about the name, but I think it's a bit late to even worry about that.
Yeah, but one can imagine that, Cyril Ramaphosa and his fellow travelers are not known for their courage, so there'll probably be a kowtowing somehow. The rules will be bent a la Phala Phala.
Yes, who knows exactly what kind of... at the end of the day, it's not that hard for a party like MK to comply. The signature requirement for them is really quite small. They're not a struggling party. They could put those together overnight. The problem is an organizational one. You need someone who's in charge of signatures, who actually gets hard copies, who takes them to the IEC on time. On that front, I don't know what kind of organizational structures MK has, and that will probably be the crisis rather than the support.
Yeah, and to even get to an interview on time is quite difficult. So I'd imagine to get the signatures on time would be quite difficult. So let's, so I think we've got to understand that the ANC have got a very, very sturdy base, despite themselves.
Yes, they do.
And that must be acknowledged.
Yeah, they have a rock-solid core, which, it's hard to put a number to it. Let's say they got 10 million last time. I'd say kind of 8 million of those votes are pretty rock-solid and not...
Yeah, they're going to take those votes to the grave, that 8 million.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So that's the ANC, somewhere starting with a 4, one would imagine. And from there on, we can all guess as to whether it's a 4 followed by what.
Well, 3 months is a long time to go to an election, and the ANC is in an interesting position there. If the public and ANC voters get a sense that the kind of precipice has been reached and they've fallen over the other side, you can exponentially unravel. Now, that doesn't mean all those voters go to other parties. It just means the ANC voters go, look, this thing's broken, and they stay away in huge numbers, and you drop into the 30s, That is a possible scenario. But if we go by just what the hard data says, they're sort of aiming for around 40 and maybe 40 plus a little bit, and real problems.
Yeah. And if, they tried the one magic bullet, which was the ICJ case against Israel, that gave them what seemed to be a little bit of a boost, especially in the Western Cape. The other magic bullet, one would imagine, is that you just somehow keep the lights on for 2 months.
Yes, well, they're struggling on that front. I don't know to what extent the ICJ case will help them internationally. The problem with a conflict like that is it's fundamentally divisive from first principles. It pre-exists the conflict, people's positions, and their positions are fairly fundamental. In other words, there are very few people, I think, in the big picture who would have switched sides. I think there are people who've gone, look, Israel's gone too far. But in other words, they're still on Israel's side in the big picture. That's just they have set aside an exemption for this war and the way it's behaved. But I don't think anyone has fundamentally gone, well, thanks to the ANC, I'm now going to support Palestine. I don't know if that's happened really. Yeah.
And then let's get on to the other, our official opposition party, which is the Democratic Alliance.
Yes.
Which has had issues of their own. Last general election, they were at 19%. Your polling puts them at 20%, with potentially a little more than that.
Yeah. So the DA is generally around sort of 22, 23 as a base number. Where it does better and it goes up over 25 is on lower turnout scenarios, which is encouraging for the party because it means that its base are likely to turn out on election day to a greater degree than the ANC and other parties' base. So if it has a really good day, it could get 25 plus. If it has a kind of standard performance, probably between 20 and 25.
Now, we spoke about the potential threats to the ANC coming from MK, but to the DA, there's also people nipping at their heels.
Yeah, so this is a long-standing problem. I mean, you and me were talking about this before we started filming. And, there's a long-standing problem of a lot of smaller parties eating away at the DA's core support base. The problem's exemplified in the Western Cape, where, parties like PA and Good and stuff are very effective in certain ethnic minorities at eating away at the DA's vote. So it has to spend a lot of its time kind of defending itself from these smaller parties. And I think that does distract from its ability to eat into the kind of ANC vote share, the alienated vote share, the general black majority. And yeah, as a result of that, it's, what everyone wants to see from the DA is a party that really makes a substantial sort of 5 to 10% jump in its support, which means it's fundamentally changed the nature of its support base from just kind of minority support to including a substantial block of black South Africans. And that's not something I think you're going to see in this election. It might make some small progress amongst black voters, but I don't think that's substantial. And that's the DA's biggest challenge and has been for, 20 years. But it's not, I don't think this is the election where you're going to see that.
And Gareth, where are the newer parties that, people like Action SA,
yes.
Build One South Africa, Rise Mzansi?
Well, it's very hard to tell because those parties all fall within the margin of error. The margin of error of these polls is usually between 2 and 4%, and that means any particular number in the real world could be 2 or 4% higher or lower. All these parties fall within that band, sort of 1 to 3%. There's no substantial movement amongst them. Some might do better than others and end on 3. Some might do worse and end on 0.5. But that's the general band in which they all sort of operate.
Okay. And, there's only the potential for a surprise. One would imagine they might have been better had they all been one party, one would imagine.
Well, yes, in some cases. Some cases I think there's a sort of a natural overlap. Other cases I don't. But yeah, one of the big things that is not, we haven't felt yet is the impact of advertising on this election, because that can only start in earnest once the election window is proclaimed. TV adverts and radio adverts, which have a huge impact on the market. And that's really where money plays a fundamental role. And these smaller parties do have some money, unlike in the past. I don't think it's a budget that competes with anything like the DA or the ANC, but they have enough to have some impact on that front. And I think they'll be relying heavily on that to try and push them up 1% or 2%. We don't know what their budgets are exactly. We don't know what their adverts are, if they'll be effective, where they'll run them, how well targeted they are. But that is an area which you can gain some traction in the next 3 months.
And before we move to other parties, let's just stay with the DA, and we'll come back and talk about provinces in a minute. Let's talk about nationally, the EFF. Now, I have got a comment box that is full because I've, in my own, I had a fun interview with JJ Tabani, and at the end of it, we gave our predictions, just
right.
Him and I, as people that watch it.
Right.
And, he was relatively bullish on the EFF in giving them around 16%, 17%, somewhere
right.
there. And I said, I don't understand the bullishness around that. I understand the noise. Yes. They're a noisy bunch. But, I pegged them at 12% and all hell broke loose. Every EFF supporter seemingly is very upset, as if I have the casting vote. But anyway, what is your research telling you about the EFF?
Well, Mike, that just tells you what a powerful man you are.
I clearly am,
yeah. So, as I said, the EFF vote is volatile, and they have, as a base support line, gone, that's in other words before turnout, gone up to sort of 15 and 16 in some polls. But the real test is not base support. It is turnout, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get 100% of every party going to vote. Only a certain percentage of them will pitch up on election day. And that's where the EFF really hurts. It's the price you pay for having a very angry, kind of alienated base. Those people are the most likely not to vote. They've effectively got a choice. Express my rage at the ANC through voting for the EFF, or give up and don't vote. And it kind of splits 50-50.
Yeah.
So the minute turnout drops, the EFF hurts, and it drops more into your range of 10 to 12. And I would say that's a more realistic scenario than the kind of 15-16 one. It is possible that they can that they can improve. 3 months is a bit of a time, but I would say as things stand, 10 to 12 seems a good read.
Yeah. Or you can go into the box if you're really angry and press really hard when you make your vote. That's also a protest. Apparently that counts more.
But yeah, well, sorry, just another point on that, Mike. I mean, the thing you need to understand about the EFF is it's got the same kind of problem as the DA. The DA, it needs to be able to make big inroads into the rest of the electorate to grow in a substantive way. The EFF's problem is that it relies on two kinds of voters. The one are people that are actually on board a kind of radical socialism, but that's actually a very small market in South Africa. We're kind of conservative bunch. It's probably a minority of the EFF support. The other half of its support comes from this kind of angry, alienated ANC, ex-ANC voter who's really attached to the party to stick it to the establishment and the ANC and so on and so forth. And that section of your vote is very volatile. So you have to ask the EFF, what's the long-term plan? If the ANC collapses, what are you going to offer after that? Because then there's no more angry ANC. Then you have to literally get people on board on your policies and your values. And those things are quite bonkers. There's not a big market for that stuff. So I think the EFF's vote has always been inflated to a degree in the sense that actual core kind of people interested in the EFF's ideology are quite small. But yes. It rides on the back of this alienation and anger to boost its numbers, and that's a very volatile way to go about your business.
Yeah, I did make that point in that time when we were talking about the vote that there's been no indication to me that South Africa is a revolutionary country, and I make the point, a perverse point, that if we couldn't have a revolution in the 80s, then I don't see the need for a revolution now.
Oh, I got lots to say about that, Mike.
Yes, please.
So, I mean, the environment for revolution in South Africa is perfect. The perfect environment. Massive, long-standing unemployment, unhappiness, low educational levels, a lack of faith in the state and key institutions, a huge unhappiness and alienation amongst voters, and an anger towards governing parties. Those are the kind of environments the world over which will trigger revolution, but it doesn't happen in South Africa. Not only that, we actually have, as you just intimated, kind of revolutionary parties that, we're literally here to upturn the state and, fundamentally change the structure of the South African edifice. And it doesn't happen. You have lots of pockets of unhappiness, protest votes and protests and public service delivery protests and so on and so forth, but no fundamental revolution. So why is that? One of the reasons is that the leaders of this thing are useless, of the revolution. I mean, the EFF is the world's most useless revolutionary party. I mean, if you had to say to Stalin or Mao, do you lead the revolution from inside the state or outside the state? They'd all say, well, outside the state, because that's what we're trying to upturn. We don't go and take photos on the red carpet at State of the Nation address. You don't validate the thing you're trying to upturn. So they're kind of half in and half out, and they can't behave like a proper revolutionary party. The other one I think that's a big contributing factor is the kind of geographic landscape that apartheid has left us with. We don't have a Tahrir Square in South Africa. We have all these different pockets of populations in each metros that are split and divided by, long-standing socio-economic divides. And there's no sense of cohesion amongst people. They can't meet somewhere. There's no spark point. In a macro sense, I think Gauteng is the closest to that, seen as a whole. I mean, it's the place where stuff happens first. It's the most volatile environment. It's close to the borders. It has a huge influx of migrants. There's massive unhappiness in urban areas where it's much more intense than rural areas. But still, I mean, you would have thought this environment has been rife for 10 years. What's happening? And no one can capitalize on it.
I suppose to your point, if we saw the Zuma riots in 2021, how they, really started in KZN and really struggled to break out of that little enclave.
Yes, but also that was fundamentally driven by criminality rather than an intent to upturn the state.
But I'm saying at least it was a spark.
Yes,
and,
there was
and nobody was even trying to stop it.
And no one could capitalize on it.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the EFF, the revolutionary vanguard of South Africa. For once, there's an actual legitimate uprising, actual groups of people in mass numbers demonstrating huge unhappiness. Nowhere on the scene. Not, I mean, you would have thought they would have gone, this is the moment, people. Let's make this, it's sparking in Joburg. Let's take it to the next level. Let's get behind it. Nothing. They couldn't capitalize on a hand-given kind of protest.
Yeah, and we've seen it before in different guises, even in the early 90s when the IFP went on a rampage to the Johannesburg CBD, to Shell House, as it was then, to go and fight the ANC. You know, a couple of bullets later, the thing was over and everybody went back to where they started. So, you know, that was really the basis of my point, saying that I'm not sure that the revolutionary thing lands. I also have enormous faith in South Africans for being a country full of ambition and quite entrepreneurial. You know, I really believe that if South Africa was given its head, if we had a party in power that supported free markets, South Africa would be a Korea, South Korea, not North Korea. I really think we've got the necessary, except for electricity, the most important part, which is the human capital.
Yes.
South Africans are naturally entrepreneurial. They are not a sit on a paint tin lot. You know, that's in Zim.
Yes.
Here, the guys are very, 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 the majority of people are very, you know, you can see it by the consumer trends. These are people that want to have nice things and they're prepared to work for it.
Yes.
And we saw it in state capture. They were prepared to work very hard for their ill-gotten gains. It wasn't like they just sat there.
Yes.
They really worked for those ill-gotten gains. I mean, you've got to take your hat off to Zuma. The guy works 24 hours a day for the money he steals. So, you know, I get the feeling if we turn this for good, you know, it would be a great thing. So to tell everybody that, sorry, the state will own all the land, you know, is a terrible, I think in South Africa, people aspire to own their own property.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, so the idea of the state owning all the property, which, please, people, have a nice look at the EFF manifesto. They talk land, 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 and the way that they will implement it is to take away all property rights. Right? Yes. It's not land redistribution they're interested in. It's property rights, and the state then owns all the property rights. So they want to leave people out there without any property. And property has a very broad definition. It's land, it's your car, it's your business. Yes. It means that at any point the state...
It's also your rights.
It's your rights. It means that at any point somebody can pitch up at your house or your place of work or your business and say, sorry, we've decided that you no longer own this studio. We are taking it.
Well,
right?
I mean, the problem with that approach, I mean, you know, aside from the obvious stuff, is that it's a constitutional right to be able to own land at the moment. So, I mean, what they're saying fundamentally is we need to change the kind of constitutional agreement that we have, and that is not limited to land. That's limited to a lot of other stuff. They want to do away with provinces. They want to do away with municipalities. So, the trick that the EFF does is it often gets people to engage on an issue-by-issue basis. You know, the land. Let's have a conversation about why it would be a bad idea to nationalize all the land. But really the conversation you want to have is, you know, are you happy with our constitutional dispensation or not? Because never mind the land, if these guys get a 66% majority, they'll change things you don't even know about. What the land is a proxy to be able to change the constitution. And, you know, that is a fundamentally different conversation that impacts on every element of South African life. And that's really what they want. The land is a product of that majority. That's what you have to stop.
Yeah. I do think that, you know, as you say, some people like the message, will support the EFF. Some people don't know that's the message.
Yes.
But I don't think it's a majority of people, and that's why I also look at these numbers. I look at elections. I'm sorry, I know that you're very scientific on this. I look at it from a very simplistic basis almost, to say, what did you get in the last election and what have you done since then? Mm. If you've done some good stuff, your number might go up. If you've done some bad stuff, your number probably won't go up. Yes. And could probably go down.
That's a very good formula.
And, you know, by that, I'll have a look at that. And if one takes the ANC as an example, when they did really well in, you know, in the early 2000s, their vote went all the way up to 69%.
Yes.
Because people did acknowledge and felt themselves getting richer, right, and better off. And ever since then, they have hemorrhaged support, right? That happens. And, I'm looking at the EFF, and the last election, they got just over 10%. And I can't see what they've done since then that has been good.
Yes.
Because, what everybody's missing here is we've debated Cyril's very odd State of the Nation address, which was more of a puff piece, at length. Why? Because he actually held the thing, because there was no disruption, which was quite nice. Let the guy speak, because you're going to get that message out. So, yeah, there we are. But you mentioned that they want to get rid of the provinces. But before we get rid of the provinces, they're going to be part of the elections now, right? And therein lies some interesting analysis, isn't there, around the provinces?
Yeah. So, this is going to lead to coalition talk, I can see at some point. So let me just preempt that. As per the latest polling that's publicly available, the ANC plus MK plus the EFF are on around 62%. In 1994, the ANC got 62%. Now, MK and the EFF are branches of the same ideological tree. They're a bit more radicalized and personality-driven, but they're all born of the ANC and in general terms share that ANC kind of racial nationalistic universe. What's changed since 1994? Not much in terms of fundamental political outlook in South Africa. The opposition all generally swimming in the same pool without much real exception in the big picture. The ANC is split, but really those three parties are all the same. So how does this affect parties like the EFF and the MK? Well, the ANC in this election is position A1A. Doesn't matter what it gets. It has options on the one side with the EFF and MK and on the other side with the opposition to form an alliance. Everything revolves around the ANC and what it decides to do and the direction it decides to go. The EFF and the MK, I think, have already identified that this is an option. And, in his message to Julius Malema, this bizarre birthday message Zuma made, he said the first goal is to consolidate the black majority in South Africa here, and we can sort out the details afterwards. And no sooner than 24 hours later did Malema say we open to working with the EFF. Those guys understand that together, and this is particularly in the EFF's interest because MK is hurting them, they're stronger than separately, and they're a stronger negotiating bloc with the ANC than they are separately. And I suspect those guys are talking to each other pretty constantly behind the scenes. So, yeah, there's a big dilemma here, and the EFF has got a kind of fundamental problem when it comes to, the ANC has got a kind of fundamental problem when it comes to provinces like Gauteng and KZN. The EFF has now, I think, made a decision and has less of a problem. It's basically going to say, look, it's us and MK or you and the DA, and put the ANC in that position and see what it does to the party internally. So I don't think the EFF lacks for clarity as to its long-term strategic goal. I think all the chips are on the ANC at the moment.
Do you see any likelihood of the ANC? Because, look, let's talk about the ANC, EFF, MK thing. When one looks at the scenes that we've seen recently in Ekurhuleni.
Yes.
And do you think that is just minor squabbling, but it's just done on a more sort of physical basis, or do you think that's problematic for the future of that coalition?
Yes, I think it is problematic, but entirely aligned with what the EFF does.
Yes, but I'm talking about more from an ANC perspective, because the EFF does what the EFF does.
Correct. And what you see, the EFF, I'm really interested in these people who think that the EFF is a viable option for the ANC in and of itself. If you look at the EFF over the last 10 years, its fundamental purpose is to destabilize and cause chaos. Doesn't matter if it's an opposition government, doesn't matter if it's Gauteng or the Eastern Cape, doesn't matter if it's the ANC in Ekurhuleni. Its job is to cause chaos. Does it in Parliament, it does it in every institution, it does it publicly with the private sector when it storms stores. It wants to create chaos and uncertainty and anarchy. Why would the EFF now want to create stability in a government? Is not what it wants. It wants to destabilize the edifice fundamentally and break the ANC and cause disunity. So it'll use any pragmatic mechanism to achieve that end. And there's no ways you can... What it'll do for the ANC, I think, nationally, is it'll propose some preposterous national agreement. We want to have the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Minister, and we want to also run 6 things and that the ANC cannot agree to. And then it'll say, oh, well, we gave the ANC our best shot. They said no, over to them.
There is one thing that also stands in the way, and that is that I think the ANC have got enough experience to know that that kind of destabilization hurts the economy to the extent that there's nothing left to steal.
Yes.
And that kind of private motivation is a big deal. At the end of it all, we all put ourselves first with the decisions we make.
Yes.
And to know that the fiscus is going to run dry in a month if you sign this piece of paper, then I can't get the tender because there'll be no tender to get.
Yeah, and the international implications of going into a thing with the EFF, I mean, there will be a run on the rand. It'll be financial chaos. And yes, I think the ANC is well aware of that. I mean, the ANC, its fundamental purpose is to centralize the state and have a majority in control. That way, it can rubber stamp all decisions in line with party decisions. There's no real independence, and the whole South African state is run the way the ANC is done, from a very powerful kind of NEC or cabinet. And people that can align with that kind of objective, it will be able to work with. People that cannot, it won't. I don't see the EFF aligning with that. I mean, they want to control that scenario. They don't want to be subservient to it. And it's just doesn't work for them, I don't think.
And the potential for an ANC DA stroke multi-party charter coalition?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that, and a lot of people say it's a big probability. I don't know. It's such a fundamentally difficult scenario to understand how it would play out inside each party. Because at the end of the day, each party needs to give a mandate for that to happen. And there are huge tensions inside both parties as to whether that would be a good or a bad thing. So it fundamentally risks at first principles fracturing each party. And in order to sell it, if it is a viable solution and it does work, you need to be able to bring both parties on board. And that requires some really serious leadership, some very convincing and compelling arguments, and some agreements that are watertight and allow each side to feel confident and secure in that agreement. Those are very, very difficult to do. So it might be a case that, some kind of pragmatic necessity forces that kind of coalition between the two. How stable it be is going to be very difficult to determine.
Yeah. I actually still think that that stands a very good chance, because if coalitions that we've seen have shown me one thing, and that is that it's very difficult to be in coalition with people that covet your voters. We've even seen it, with the DA and Action SA, where they covet the same voters. There's a certain overlap, there's no doubt.
Yes.
And especially with many of those people coming out of the DA. And instead of being great partners, they were almost adversarial to one another, yes, because they don't want the other guy. I mean, we know that the big sort of complaint was the DA saying the DA-led coalition, and yes, all of these things become problematic because you're looking to get the other guy's votes.
Yes.
And vice versa. And, but it does make a lot more sense to have a coalition where you do not covet each other's votes, because you'll never get them.
Yes.
And that way, and that's what you see overseas, don't you? Where you have the Greens together with the Social Democrats or the whatever, yes, where they know their votes are their votes and their votes are their votes. And they can go into coalition and talk from a bloc perspective. So, that to me puts one in favor of that coalition.
Yes. Well, I think it would hurt both parties' support to a certain degree. They would both lose support in that scenario.
Unless it works.
No, even if it works. I mean, there are people that are on board the DA because it is not the ANC. It is a fund. I don't think they're the majority of DA supporters, but there are a significant section of DA voters who their deal with the DA is, we're on board you because you're not the ANC. And there are a significant section of ANC voters we are on board you because we will never be on board a white party or the DA or any kind of Western opposition or anything like that. Those people won't like that agreement at all, but both sides will lose support to that front. Maybe that's a good thing. I mean, they might win some of them back if they can convince those people that they're not sacrificing their identity and that they are having an impact. But those are such unknowns, long-term trends. It's very difficult to say how it would play out.
And Gareth, I know we mentioned provinces, and then we started talking coalitions. Have you had a look at the polling for per province?
Not a lot of the provinces. I mean, you get good subsamples for things like Gauteng, the most populous provinces, Gauteng, KZN, the Western Cape. And yeah, I mean, Gauteng is the most likely for the ANC to fall below 50%. I mean, if an election was held tomorrow, it would get way below 50%. There's a real crisis there. And there are a lot of different options for how to form a government there. It's the most realistic environment for opposition parties to form a fairly stable coalition. KZN is now wide open after MK. I mean, I think you're going to have 5 parties all around 20%. And how that works out in the long run, we'll have to see. The Western Cape, I think the DA's majority is still solid, but it is kind of in this really attritional fight to stay above 50. I mean, I don't think it's going to grow dramatically in the Western Cape, but I think its majority is fairly solid. Again, though, you have to see what the next 3 months do. The ability of parties like PA to make a big impact is quite possible if some big sort of, issue with a kind of identity nature at its core that they're able to capitalize on, if they're able to advertise, if they're able to do groundwork on scale. Yeah, those guys can hurt the DA. As things stand, I think their majority is okay.
Okay, so overall, we're heading to a very interesting time, and we'll have to get you back here as we get a little closer to election date, because there's a lot up for grabs, isn't there?
Yes. No, I mean, yeah, and there's going to be a lot more research coming out, I think, in the next 3 months or so, and a lot more stuff to talk about. And yeah, we'll have to see where things stand.
Well, Gareth van Onselen, thank you so much for sharing your findings and your analysis with us. To everybody that joined us on the State of the Nation, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank Pace Car Rental, who have been sponsoring State of the Nation over the last couple of weeks. And we look forward to having you again on State of the Nation. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll see you again next time.